Greg Barradale,
Hello.
senior reporter at The Big Issue. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks very much for having me. Very excited to be on.
You're in to talk about housing.
Yes.
You're in to talk about right to buy. You had this piece that went viral because of what was revealed in it was astonishing. I think you had a lot of people's blood boiling a couple of days ago when this went live. Mine in particular. Sort of give us like an overview. What were you looking into?
Yes. So I guess the main idea was what we were calling yo-yo homes. So if you think of it like you buy a house under right to buy, you get it at a discount. There's a really good get-rich-quick scheme you can do where if you wait 5 years, after 5 years, you don't have to pay any of the discount back. When you come to sell it, the council will probably buy it back off you. They've got a right of first refusal. And when they do that, you net all of the discount, all of the appreciation on the value. So we found examples where people were making £200,000 off a house in 5-6 years by selling it back to the council they bought it off. So at the end of this 5, 6, 7 years or whatever, the councils have ended up with the same house they had years earlier, but are down, £100,000-300,000.
It's astonishing because it's at a time as well where we're talking a lot about council tax rises.
Yeah.
We're looking across the country, particularly Birmingham Council, a bankrupt council who is also now in heavy dispute with Unite the Union and GMB over not being able to adequately pay their bin workers. The councils are impoverished. So the fact that they're sort of hemorrhaging this money is astonishing. And I think that that's sort of probably what got a lot of people's backs up. But can you talk about some of the examples? Because there was one in Hackney Council that was pretty astonishing.
Yeah. So the one in Hackney Council was they sold it under right to buy in 2014 for £95,050. Then in 2021, they bought it back for £365,
Mad.
which is £269, £950 gap, 6.5 years. And that's interesting, obviously, because that is a lot of money. But it was also based on a valuation from 2012. So you apply, by the time you come to buy it, actually under right to buy is basically more valuable than that valuation anyway. So the discount was potentially even bigger.
No, absolutely. But I mean, the original evaluation, you could make an argument of actually it is, but they're going for below market price to begin with. And then when they are being sold, they're being sold at market value, which is astonishing.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. It's essentially privatized gains, socialized losses, right? You've got these select people making a lot of money. You could argue they're not doing anything wrong. You can also argue perhaps the councils aren't necessarily doing anything wrong in that, they're doing this because the alternative is, the amount of money they're spending on temporary accommodation for homeless families. You've got homelessness going absolutely through the roof. You mentioned all the things pushing council budgets to the brink, and temporary accommodation homelessness is a massive one. So in a weird way, it kind of makes sense for these councils to go, right, instead of forking out to these private landlords, let's buy these houses back. Okay, we're making a loss on what we paid for them, but it's still better than the alternative. Obviously, they'd rather pay less for them. Obviously they would rather not be at such a loss. But it's kind of this inequality that's really baked into the system. And I think if you're looking at this and trying to get on the housing ladder, you're looking at this and going, well, in London, I think it's 30 years it will take you to save for a deposit. You're looking at this.
Is that if you're off an average salary?
Yeah, I think so. And
you're paying rent at the same time.
Yeah, and I imagine, you look at this and you go, what's going on, right?
Yeah, it's frustrating, it's infuriating, but it's also there's quite a sinister element to it, right? Because the one of the biggest problems that you've got at the moment is the rise in hidden homelessness and people who are being sort of shepherded around temporary accommodation when a lot of these properties are, available.
Yeah.
Arguably they are available. I mean, when you've been reporting for Big Issue, have you noticed a rise in hidden homeless? I mean, that's an obvious question. Obviously, you've probably noticed a rise in it. But what have you seen?
I think you just notice sort of really just all forms of homelessness. And I think it massively trickles down because, part of the pressure on councils that it's so hard to even get the sort of initial basic help. So, at points, why would you, it's sort of almost disincentive to go and try and get, registered as homelessness and qualify for the help. And, you see how grim the landscape is. And, do you have people just sort of not putting themselves forward, not even wanting to enter the system? I mean, you see that with benefits as well, right? You see people going, well, I've been refused so many times for stuff I'm entitled to that actually I'll just sort of drop off the map.
It's a humiliating process as well, right? Like a lot of the attending the job, these sort of job centre meetings that you're required to go to in order to qualify for the universal credit. It's a humiliating process because you're asked over and over again why the hell you're not good enough to go and get a job, know, and you when you're looking at a point in your life where you're perhaps not so lucky, that is it's humiliating.
Yeah, and you've got the DWP putting job coaches, I think they'd use a different word, in GP surgeries as well, which is one of those things.
No, I think they are job coaches now. I think they're like work mentors, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they perhaps would, they are job coaches, but I think they're like, oh no, they're not actually.
It's funny that because I actually went to a sort of like I've been to a couple of the DWP sort of like big announcements recently, and they're always at football clubs now. They're trying to get entice people to come into football clubs. Yeah, no, honestly, they were like, it takes the stigma out of it, and it's like, does it? Like, I mean, maybe. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I think that's kind of the thing with this story that struck me is like, if you're at that end of the spectrum and you're basically having to like fight for quite meager amounts of help, and then this is happening where, if you enter into another bit of the state, if you're essentially winning the lottery with these houses, right? And that sort of contrast, I think, is pretty.
I think it is like winning the lottery, isn't it? Really, you are like extraordinarily lucky to get onto the list in the first place, and then you're extraordinarily lucky to do the right to buy scheme. I mean, do you think it's right that scheme would come to an end?
Not sure, actually. I think what Labour is doing, you could see as trying to abolish it without actually abolishing it, like as far as they can get. They're massively putting the discounts down. I think it was 130k, that's the max. Now it's 38k. They're increasing how long you need to live in it or be a council tenant. That's one of the mad things about this. Not mad, but that to qualify for right to buy, it's 3 years, but not in the same property. So you can just have been not in consecutive years. So you just have to have been a council tenant for 3 years at some point, which, the argument being, it's a great way for people to get on the property ladder. People who've got the secure tenancies have like put down roots somewhere. Right. Well, the council gets some money for these properties. You get to be on the housing ladder. That's kind of an everyone wins situation in theory. But I think, what you've seen actually playing out that, well, selling these homes was meant to replace, you're meant to then replace them. The Tories put the discounts way up in 2012 with the idea of replacing every house that was sold.
Did they?
Yes, so the level that the Labour are putting them down to now is just what they were before Cameron put them up. So that under the Tories, it basically got sort of supercharged again. I think they managed to replace about a third of the homes they sold. And that's the thing, like, I think there's a lot of tinkering and a lot of watering down of right to buy you can do. But I think ultimately the point of it is some people get on the housing ladder, some people make some money, not everyone. And in practice, we're down a huge amount of social housing, which, we need.
I mean, arguably, it could be seen as meritocratic because one of the biggest issues that is facing young people or anyone actually who's attempting to get onto the housing ladder is the sort of the bank and mum and dad. So you either have access to a huge pot of cash, a deposit, a lump sum that can get you onto the housing ladder, or you don't. That's the huge divide.
Yeah.
And this right to buy program is the government cheat sheet for people who don't have access to that.
Yeah.
However, are young people actually getting into these houses in the first place?
Yeah.
That's the sort of issue.
And I think, and that's one of the things which is quite, good about right to buy is that you don't need a deposit in many cases because the discount basically is the deposit, because the bank knows it'll get its money back because it's 10, 15, however many percent, which would be a deposit anyway. So it's actually, it's quite a good way into home ownership in that sense. But you compare it with, other ways of getting into affordable housing, the first home scheme, which, similar to Right to Buy, you get stuff at a discount. But when you sell that, you have to sell it on with the discount. And, that creates an affordable home that's affordable forever, and it sort of stays within the scheme. But the government sort of has rejected the idea of doing that for Right to Buy, because it says, it's complicated, it's not really worth it.
So if you buy an affordable home, you have to sell it on what not at market value, but at an affordable price. Is that what? Sorry, just explain.
Yeah. So it's the first home scheme, and so when you sell it, it gets sold with the discount passed on to someone else who qualifies for that particular scheme. I think if you can't sell it in, I think it's 6 months or something, then you can sell it on the open market and the government gets the discount back. You sort of pay it back to them. But that's forever. And, that's ongoing. And it's like, why can't you do that for Right to Buy? And that's something, the government thought about, hasn't done. It's extending how long you have to pay the discounts back. But, there is this idea of, well, what if you had, what if Right to Buy created, not just ways for individual people to get on the property ladder, but actually, ongoing homes that are always affordable.
Yeah. So, I mean, the answer isn't just necessarily to build more houses. It's also to sort of rectify the schemes that are currently in place.
Yeah. I think that's interesting because, I mean, the story yesterday that Labour is considering cutting the affordable homes target in London is really interesting, because it's like, I think the big argument over that 1.5 million target at the moment is, do a certain amount of them need to be affordable, or actually is that holding it back? Developers sort of going, oh, well, it's just not worth our while if a certain amount are affordable. But then you've got people saying, well, actually, the big problem is you can build as many homes as you want. But if no one can save for a deposit, if no one can afford them in the first place, like, who's it really helping?
Do you think it would be helpful if these Right to Buy properties, sorry, jumping back to that, do you think it would be helpful if you weren't able to rent out that property once you'd purchased it? Because I do think that has been an issue around the country. Obviously, it doesn't directly apply to this story. But sort of speaking more broadly around Right to Buy.
Yeah, I think it's an issue. I'm probably going to really equivocate here. But I think it's like 40% of homes that were sold under Right to Buy have ended up as like private rental, which is obviously, quite obviously shows it's not working. That's not what you want to happen to these homes. And I think a lot of the way we talk about Right to Buy is like it's a policy which is already finished, and we're looking at its obituary and we're going, oh yeah, look how much damage this thing caused over like 40 years, and yet it's still in place. I think that's always something that really jars with me, that it's like, oh, like, no, like we're talking about this dead person who's in the room with us now and letting off quite a horrible smell. But I think, the government would say, well, people's lives change, and, if you have to go away for a couple of years and rent it out, then fine. I think, also,
it's quite a huge allowance, really, that, isn't it?
Yeah. And
your circumstances change, so you might need to make a bit of cash off this.
And it's like, when you go out reporting and talking to landlords, it's mad how you only ever meet or speak to the really, compassionate, good landlords. Every landlord you speak to is like, no, I treat my tenants really, really well. I don't make much money off this, but that seems to be everyone you speak to.
Yeah.
It's like, surely at some point there are the other ones. Like, where are they?
You've got to exist somewhere.
Yeah.
Calling freelancers, small and mid-sized business owners. Tide's Instant Saver account offers up to 4% AER variable, flexible access, and competitive returns.
Unlike other options on the market, you won't need to hold your money with Tide for a fixed period. That means you'll have instant access and free withdrawals whenever you need it.
You can get started today with just £1, making it easy to start growing your business savings.
Want to know what you'll earn? Tide's Clever Calculator gives you a clear picture up front.
Our audience will receive £100 cash back when you deposit £5,000 within the first 30 days of opening your Tide Instant Saver account.
Use code JOE, that's JOE, Joe. New members receive an annual equivalent rate of up to 4% AER variable, free for 6 months. For the full offer, visit tide.co/Joe. T's and C's apply.
I had my own experience with one yesterday, but that's probably going to stay out of this for now. Can you talk to me a bit about the big issue? So, like, what is talk to me about what you're seeing at the moment? Because obviously, big issue is obviously, if listeners will know this, but they know it's the magazine that is sold by people who are homeless or people who are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, or risk of homelessness. Yeah, so it's not just necessarily people who are sleeping rough or actually experience homelessness. And kind of, part of the point is to support people through that and out of that. And, it's not just selling the magazine. There's other support you get. And, I mean, I think when you see like the news about the economy today that, it grew 0.1 or 0.2%, and it's like, oh great, like give us fucking nothing.
Yeah.
But, that there's often, I think, and inflation's gone down and it's only however many percent, and there's sort of, whenever you have that big like national idea that like maybe things are turning a corner, like they're still getting much harder for people at the bottom, for people with very little. Always know that the inflation stats don't capture like how much food is going up, for instance. Like inflation's way worse if you're at the bottom. So
are you telling me that trickle down economics doesn't work?
Well, I think
You've got a very striking cover.
Yeah, I guess we've actually managed to put Thatcher on the cover in the only way I think we would have done. We actually had a relaunch sort of a couple of weeks ago. So this week's issue is all about Thatcher 100. Luckily, I had to write a 5-story to go in there. So looking at her whole legacy, and sort of I think Right to Buy is a really big part of that. I think like spiritually and vibes wise as well. I think the idea that home ownership is the end goal, like the way to get ahead in this country, the way to even like survive is like, well, you're fucked if you don't own a home. Like sort of, it's almost like a casino. It's like, right, enter into this like asset speculation world where you're not just buying a place to live. When you're looking around home, you go, oh, like what's this going to be worth in 5 years? Maybe when I come to sell it off, like what are like 10 other people going to think of this when they come to view it? Like this really, like I think like quite like hard to put your finger on, but I think really pervasive, just like vibe shift of we're a home ownership nation. That's how the economy works. That's kind of how politics works. Like politicians are kind of scared to do stuff that might alienate homeowners, and I think
assets, we're an asset nation. That's the sort of we've sort of moved on from like Maslow's hierarchy, where like the shelter is sort of the basic thing that you need to survive. It's actually you need an asset.
Like am I going to be able to trade this up? And I think I mean for Thatcher, that's people who've done Right to Buy, you'd be really grateful for that. Like you have benefited. It's worked out really well for that. And I think people who've done that, homeowners, I think are seen as such a big political constituency. Fair enough, probably. But they're seen as like people that you have to please. And, Liz Truss absolutely fucked mortgage rates. And that, that was such a tangible thing which people could see. That was sort of the prison through, I think, which she was understood. But, the amount of people that are homeless now, the amount of people living in temporary accommodation, the amount of people who can't get on the housing ladder, the amount of people with awful landlords, like I think it's interesting they're not quite seen as like a big political group in the same way, and people that piss them off at your peril, and they have the power to change governments. And I think Labour, to an extent, pinning its colours to the wall with the 1.5 million homes target, sort of said we're going to try and make things better for you. What would politics look like if we saw, instead of viewing it through the lens of houses and people who are depending on that to get rich and pay off their mortgage or whatever, or even just afford a retirement? What if we saw, all right, well, what's it going to mean for the government if they don't improve lives? People who are stuck in bedsits with their children, people who are stuck in like HMOs in rooms that are just like squalid. What does that look like? Because there's a lot of them.
There is a real pandering to the homeowner. Do you think that Zach Polanski and his, actually it was the entire Green Party at their conference voting to abolish landlords, do you think that has any legs to it?
Not sure, actually. I think I wrote about this. I mean, they sort of came out and said, well, actually, it's a catchy title for, something that's a sort of 5-step program, but I can't remember what the specific points were. I think it was a lot of like rent controls, build more social housing. It felt like maybe like, let's eliminate the need for landlords. Like,
Yeah,
let's
it's certainly,
sort of like
yeah.
free ourselves. Like, which, I mean, you couldn't.
It was a snappy title, wasn't it, really? For what essentially I think that they were arguing was sort of liquidate the power that landlords have.
Yeah.
Which is that, they sort of, it always sounds like, because obviously they're not like a homogenous group, but I think speaking broadly, they've usurped a lot of property and they have control over that property
Yeah.
and those pricings, which mean that, a lot of people are pushed out.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And there's like some economists who say, oh, maybe one of the reasons our economy isn't in a great shape is because instead of like using money for productive stuff, instead of like putting it in worthwhile stuff, everyone's just encouraged to squirrel it away in housing, use it for that, why stop at one home? Why not 2, 3, 4, 5? Why not buy this whole street and rent it out? Like, and is that a particularly good use of like everyone's money that they have lying around, or could we invest it in some better stuff?
It's sort of, the whole conversation needs to be flipped on its head, doesn't it, really, about whether, because it's not even really about morality. It's sort of about, if you want to have a good local economy, you're going to need people who live in a local area to have disposable income to spend, right?
Yeah.
And if they're giving it all to a landlord who might offshore that money, in some cases, it's not going to be particularly helpful for that area, is it?
Yeah. And I guess it comes back to that point of, anytime you talk about this, people go, oh yeah, but I have this home which I do live in but have to rent out, and have to rent out for, or oh, I've just got this one home which I really look after. And it's like, are we specifically talking about you, or are we talking about people who own like massive empires? I mean, like,
Yeah.
in student towns, and like, you have landlords who've just bought up huge swathes and just don't look after stuff.
Oh yeah, well, why would you if you've got students living in them?
Oh yeah, well
Yeah. But it's also the same thing with council tenants, right? So if you are a private landlord who might rent back to the council in order to fulfill that sort of the temporary accommodation gap or the lack of social housing gap, why would you take care of that property?
Yeah.
Why would you bother? Because it's just a council tenant.
Yeah.
A lot of the time that is sort of how it's perceived. That's not my opinion. Just to be clear. I felt infuriated when I read your piece, because I think about, as someone who pays council tax, as we all do, I'm frustrated that I'm going to say something that is so Middle England, you're not even going to believe it, but I am frustrated that I look outside my window and there is a huge cavernous pothole, but the money is being spent on this instead.
Yeah.
That is infuriating. And I think that the sort of the wider point of why I feel angry is, I know how many people are struggling who are in good jobs and are in good work and are earning an honest living and spending a lot of hours in order to do so of their time. And actually, it is very difficult for a lot of people to put aside £120 a month to pay their council tax.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money. It might not, particularly at a time where a lot of people's take-home pay is, £2,000. If you're spending the majority of that on your rent and your council tax, and then you see that there are a lot of people just using it as a get-rich scheme, that's frustrating.
It is, yeah. And I guess maybe councils would say, oh, but this money is ring-fenced for housing, and it's not actually, but it's not actually your council tax.
They always love doing that, do they? They love saying money's ring-fenced.
Money's fungible. Like, and they're sort of doing this to save money on temporary accommodation. But I think say you were in one of these properties and you had the opportunity, you're looking outside your window, you're seeing these potholes, you're seeing people struggle to get the services you need. And the council comes and says, we will give you 200 grand more than you paid for this property to give it back to us.
Yeah, obviously you'd do it, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You would do it.
Yeah.
But again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. I do believe it is meritocratic, because if you cannot afford the deposit in the first place, you should, I do believe that you should have the same rights as, other people who have been gifted it.
Yeah.
You've just been gifted it through a different mechanism.
Yeah.
So I don't blame these people. It's a tricky morality issue. I think the sort of the wider scope of it it's disappointing to see a council arguably acting irresponsibly with cash.
Yeah, I sort of don't really know whether I think they are being irresponsible or not. I think you can make the argument. I think it feels like a cop out with all these things to go, well, it's the government's fault. They should just fix everything. But you know, they're saying you've got to. So currently it's 5 years. You pay the discount back. They're putting it up to 10 years, but just a promise at the moment. When are they going to do it? Who knows? Is it going to end up like one of these things like, you know, getting rid of Section 21s, getting rid of leasehold or reforming it, that, you know, is this problem the government's identified. They say, you know, they've acknowledged that people are profiteering off right to buy houses. Is it going to be this problem like Section 21, like leasehold reform, that they've identified the problem, but it takes years and years to actually do something about it? And we have this situation where everyone kind of knows it's absurd. Everyone kind of knows it's hurting people. It's, you know, unjust. Yeah, just because of politics. Really,
well, it is poor planning, isn't it? I think that's probably the most generous indictment of it. Is it just feels like poor planning, and it feels like quite a desperate solution to fill a gap. Because if you've got this rising number of people on council house waiting lists, you've got to put them somewhere. They've got to go somewhere.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Andy Burnham and Sadiq Khan both want councils to have the power to stop selling right to buy homes. And that's basically what's creating this, that they don't have any choice but to sell them and are just desperately trying to get them back. I think it was Andy Burnham, I think he described it like trying to fill a bath with the plug out. And that's kind of...
Feels like something Burnham would say.
Yeah.
I don't think he'd be offended if you do ascribe that to him either. I think he'd be all right with that.
But, you know, it is basically that. And I think, you know, coming back to the point of, you know, do I think right to buy should be abolished? But humble news reporter, I don't have opinions. But if you look at, you know, Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham want councils to be able to choose to stop selling homes. If you gave all councils that choice, how many would keep selling the homes? You know, would any? Like, it seems like they probably wouldn't, because they really, really need homes. And I think that's the backdrop to this. It's not, you know, this is how these homes are happening because of how the system is written and because of how it works. It's kind of, this is the consequence of what we have designed and what we have. It's not some sort of, you know, crazy breaking the rules. This is the system we have. This is what it looks like. The consequence is some people get to pocket 200,000, 100,000. Others can't really access the services they need.
Greg, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
You can read
and
your
we got
piece
through
now.
that whole thing without yo-yoing.
We did. Oh yeah, what was the yo-yoing for again?
So the yo-yo homes.
Yeah.
It's, you can see a visual representation, because otherwise it's just spreadsheets and numbers. Isn't it?
Spreadsheets are so back.
Yeah.
They can go and read your piece. They can go and buy a copy of The Big Issue.
Yes, please do. It's on sale. It's every week, and it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks to Tide and their instant savings account for sponsoring this week's podcast.
New members receive an annual equivalent rate of up to 4% AER variable.
Our audience will receive £100 cash back when you deposit £5,000 within the first 30 days of opening your Tide Instant Saver account.
Use code JOE. For the full offer, visit tide.co/Joe. T's and C's apply.